Good evening, everybody. System Chalk here with the 217th episode of our first YouTube run through the House of Light expansion to Book of Hours, playing as the Archaeologist. We have a few things on our to-do list. We're finishing off the sort of impromptu, not quite Salon that we ran to find out who was responsible for the Oriflamme heist. We still need to make a decision in terms of the fate of the person responsible for the heist. We want to open up the sealed vault, although at this point I think I'm probably not going to be able to do what I need to do with Denzel. Although, in fairness, I might be able to... There's one way that this may work, where I load up Denzel in terms of his capabilities and then satisfy Olympie Bichet's curiosity afterwards, because she's got 2.5 minutes to go. So maybe I'll take a shot. Problem is I know it's going to be a really tight window in both cases, and I'm going to be using consumables in each of those. So we'll see. I'll keep the option open, but I'm not going to commit to anything too heavy. And then we have gotten some lessons from watching the films and catching up on our podcasts in phonograph form, something I haven't been able to do for myself. I'm not as worried about those just because that will resolve itself over time. You know, I know where I'm placing them, and we've got plenty of time left in the winter. But again, that is going to be something that's taking up my elements of the soul and time. The more I think of it, actually, so I should have maybe done this a little bit earlier, but I think I may actually try to raise Denzel's stats. We'll see where things sit after Hokeball is satisfied. The sense of awareness persists, but the plant remains immobile, unsettling but harmless. Doesn't even have thorns. Okay, so that is that's going to be the level up for Coil and Chasm taken care of. In fact, the other thing I can do, because I'm going to be using the Edicts Inviolable to raise Strings and Songs. Strings and Songs is Heart and Sky. So we'll be able to use at least the Beguiling Melody here. Unfortunately for Herbs and Infusions and Coil and Chasm, none of these are useful. That's fine, I'll get over it. I will send the invitation to Dagmar out, but maybe I'll do that when I start talking with Olympie Bichet. I also want to be a little more aggressive on the pause button here, just because I staggered a bunch of different books, and it would be nice if I got a clear idea of what all of them produced. Okay. The Shaven Lock Tantra, also known as the one who has shaven his hair. This, the story goes, is the lore that even the shape-changing Vanaras rejected. The Tantra speaks glowingly of those who are prepared to abandon their old self to seek a new and higher self. It warns that once the change has truly begun past the third mark, a return to the old self is dangerous and painful. Whisper your secrets into the earth, burn them in fire, scatter them in the sea. Still they will cling to your hair, the Tantra cautions. It provides an occult riddle that it claims is sometimes the answer to the riddle of the Hunter's Gate. So there is our impulse. Moving on, introduction to the histories. The 17th century mystic and antiquarian Claude Hersault describes divergent incidents in 5 major histories. The prologue warns at length of the iniquities of one Julian Cosley, a former colleague who Hersault now describes darkly as a worm of worms. It seems Cosley advised Hersault early in the writing of the book, but Hersault later became suspicious. Hersault identifies blood, silver, design, and the worms as the central axes of each of the histories, and claims that the so-called second history is the true one. The Seven Faces of Icarus. In the early 1530s, the late abbot of St. Brendan's, called Roaring Richard, set down his conversations with the illiterate local cunning man, Red William. Red William describes the 7 forms in which he goes about and under the world: viper, cat, fox, eagle, dove, boar, and crow. Abbot Richard ingeniously fits all of these into a framework of solar belief. According to Abbot Richard, each of Red William's forms is closer to the sun and is increasingly winged with virtue. Richard draws an analogy with the waxen wings of Icarus. Hypocrisy and false virtue will melt before the sun's heat, and so sincerity and untrammeled expression of self are the utmost piety. It's worth noting that only a year or two after Richard wrote this book, John Tregonwell was so appalled by the debaucheries of the monks of St. Brendan's that he recommended the monastery's immediate dissolution. Towards a fundamental aesthetic, or the House of Glass, Julian Cosley considered this his masterwork. Techniques for perception and analysis which permit invidious and apocalyptic conclusions, probably the most assiduously suppressed book in history. The entire run was destroyed, even the presses were melted and dispersed, but the manuscript edition has survived. The perfect hegemony of the hours is perhaps eternal, but Cosley proposes and describes confinement inescapable, aesthetic and optical techniques which might contain even an hour, profoundly disrupting the order of the Mansus. He presents this as his own work, but there are hints here and there that he received inspiration or even assistance from the nowhere hour named Snow. Unhatched hymns, hymns attributed to St. Lucia the Eyeless, patron of glassworkers and name of the hour called Meniscate. The hymns venerate every sanctioned hour, celebrating them as the sun undivided, but also suggesting that each hour may become the next. Madrigad to watchman, watchman to wolf, and so on. The hymn of the phases celebrates the Meniscate from whom we do not turn, for the truth which is beauty, the beauty which is truth, and the perfect balance between the two. The hymn of the reflections more puzzlingly celebrates the Meniscate as the sister of Janus, mother of shadow, whose visage wondrous in emptiness can reveal all truths. Use the last of the health. When I thought I'd understood, I'd only begun. I think I'll wait till the desks are cleared out for this next one, for the simple reason that I don't have, I don't quite have the same crush of books to read. Books that'll give lessons to read. Actually, sorry, it just occurred to me that the ones that I'm reading need another round anyway, so this was all rather foolish. All right. Apollo and Marsyas, the libretto of a lost opera concerning the contest between Apollo and Marsyas and its tragic outcome. The librettist is identified only by their initials. In the original myth, Marsyas lost the musical contest and was flayed by Apollo, who later regretted it. In this version, Marsyas' skin has a further history. The skin of Marsyas gives oracles and is later smuggled to Phrygia, where the priestesses of Cybele use it for a drum. At the climax, the striking of the drum drives would-be violators of the priestess to suicidal madness. The opera ends with a wistful hymn from the youngest priestess on the beauty of mountain pines. Two Wombs, One Heart, a fanciful account by Thirza Blake of the early life of the twins, their time as mortals before they became hours or even long in a dry kingdom beyond the Western Sea, which Thirza suggests might have been ancient Mexico. It is widely known that the sister was rich and the witch poor. It is widely known that the witch loved the sister first. It is not widely known that the witch was first employed to teach the sister the arts of embroidery. Although Thirza is very probably just making up much of the story, there are long passages expounding notable techniques of weave work and thread fight. In particular, when witch and sister flee across the sea to be together, Thirza explains how they fashioned a peace weave with Heart and these arts, and then, to tame the wilds, called on Heart again to swaddle the thunder in the peace weave. Traveling at Night Volume 2, the annotated dream journals of Christopher Alopoli, sometimes called the only readable occultist. Literate, entertaining, bewildering. There is an extensive discussion on the comparisons between Alopoli's own dreams and those of the Emperor Elagabalus, who Alopoli regards as a dupe or avatar of the sun in rags. The white is west of the world, Alopoli remarks, and winter does not wait forever. Elagabalus found his way to the winter door at last, thankfully. Speech can't pass the white door, and honestly, Elagabalus never had anything very interesting to say. I tried to follow in his footsteps, but I never learnt enough of the white. I suppose I'm thankful for that too, but here's what I do know. As I used to say in my youth, the day is done and so am I, but I've earned my pay. Okay. Let's recover some... Oh. There's not much work on offer in Brancrude, but I can find 6 pence worth of odd jobs. Okay. So, if I want to raise strings and songs, 2, 3, 4, so I'm only 2 heart away from that. Better still, I'm 2 heart or 2 sky away from that, an important distinction. The catch is that I also want to improve herbs and infusions. That's a heart and nectar. So 3 of those 4. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it for everyone, but let's take a peek. So let's run with actually, okay. First of all, I'm going to take the remaining sky. So Singlefoot songs. We've already got the Beguiling Melody, so, and Opening the Sky isn't available to me because I'm using the phonographs. So we'll read the Peruvian Diaries. So on its own, this is sufficient to open up the Edicts Inviolable. The next thing I want to do, in fact... Sorry, I'm trying to think if I can get a little clever here. I can spike the Curious Hunch. That gets me 1. And I guess I can use the Ascendant Harmony. It's not that hard to get it back. Yeah. Okay, so a bit of a shame that I didn't decide that earlier. The other alternative that I have would be... Oh, here's an interesting one. So if I do Storm, Satisfaction, Solace, and I'm looking for Heart and Nectar, so we do the same story here. 4, 5... I think... That still leaves me 1 short. I could, if I'm really careful, I could sneak in a scent. But I don't think I want to do that. I think let's stay the course. So let's say these are all for Edicts Inviolable, and we're not going to mess with that. So any remaining heart and then the nectar will go towards leveling up herbs and infusions. Okay, Ambrose's desk. We'll toss a medal at it. And I think this is where I quickly find out that I actually don't have many options left. Oh, actually, okay, so yeah, what we're going to do, I know exactly how I want to handle this now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find Sky to replace the heart with. So I'll say I've got 1. don't think I've read this one recently. Okay, so this is 2. We've already got a storm, so already got a satisfaction. Solace. Already working on this. Already have the beguiling melody, and gossip doesn't get me. Okay, so that's as far as I could take that particular idea. So that's it for this guy. I don't think we have any more heart to work with. And I definitely don't have any other nectar from books. Sorry, not strictly true, actually. I can get nectar from a Newman. Rites of the Roots is probably the... Oh, sorry, rights. What am I saying? Rights of the Roots. The Serpent Root. Or actually, hang on. Serpent Root gets me... I actually think the Shreddick Book of Suns, weirdly enough. Carpalith of Phalos definitely does. Now this, I have my Mandaic used up, so... But I also think... No, the Kilisimi was used for the Blake work. Okay, let's give this a shot. Although, amusingly, now that I think of it, I could have actually gone for one with the Shreddick Book of Suns. That wouldn't have given me Sky, but the second edition of Cosley's work would have given me the Sky, which again would have allowed me to switch one of these things up. Anyways, doesn't matter. I don't need to think that hard about... I don't need to think that hard about the texts. But I think that's it as far as generating memories go, so we'll leave it there. Okay, so I've got 2.5 minutes with Madame Bichet. I'm gonna give this a try with Denzel, but again, I'm gonna do the low risk options. So collaborate with Metal first. The skill is now level 7. Its power aspects have also increased. So we're not ready to level the remaining skills yet. This is where I would have considered adding the scent, but again, I don't need to get... Sometimes there's this idea of like, you know, I like trying to be efficient with the use of the day. I've relaxed a little bit as I've gained more elements of the soul, and arguably I should go back to that as I start making them like +++ abilities. But there is definitely a danger of getting just like a little too clever as far as the game goes. So now if I have this correct, I'm going to give him the Serpent Milk, and I'm going to give him either Invincible Audacity or the Forbidden Epic. So that's 12 already. So yeah, I definitely needed to give him the medal, but the good news is that's just 1 minute, and we'll very, very clearly pass that. In the name of caution, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give him the Serpent Milk first, because that's easier for me to make than the Invincible Audacity. Although, in fairness, the Invincible Audacity isn't that hard for me to make either. But in this case, we'll use the serpent milk. And then when we've confirmed that we have everything we need for Denzil, then we use the memory as the last step, and we get him to work on the sealed vault. I can offer my assistant something to drink. Serpent milk. It does look almost like milk, and it is drinkable, but don't give it to cats or babies. One thing that's kind of funny about the interface in the game is because the lines are different lengths, there's the impression that some of them are finishing earlier than others, when that's actually not true. But anyways, let's work with the books that we have. So, Singlefoot Songs. Father Stanislav John Schaller, priest and diplomat, writes of his time on the slopes of Huashan, near the Grove of Green Immortals, but never too near. Schaller's relations with the Grove are cautious. It's a library of the tree, but under the hand of the hour named Applebright. In time, however, Schaller comes to be more sympathetic to the Applebright, which he suggests causes harm only when so invited. The Singlefoots of the title are one-horned, one-footed hill things with sweet but powerful voices, powerful enough to open the mountain. The Singlefoot sometimes trample pilgrims, sometimes heal them, sometimes coerce them to enter the mountain and become Singlefoots. Schaller explains that when he found this last becoming too tempting, he decided to return to his homeland. That's a sky to work with strings and songs. The Perugian Diaries. In 1907, at the age of 18, Christopher Olopoli left Strathcoyne's household to study theology at the University of Perugia in Italy, enrolling under the name of Christopher Strathcoyne. For 4 years since his adoption from a Bristol orphanage, Olopoli served as Strathcoyne's pupil and protege, but his relationship with this austere and secretive man was always complicated. His journal confides, "I still think Fraser's intentions are good, certainly he agrees, but I never understood the final goal of his investigations. He was never prepared to enlighten me, and good intentions or not, I can no longer bear the stream of eyes. We've agreed to part almost amicably." Olopoli left Perugia in 1909 without completing his degree. He had long lost interest in his studies, and the latter half of the journal is concerned with his studies of Umbrian folk songs and notes towards his own compositions, which are of widely varying quality. One of the better ones, In the Marshes of Night, suggests that he visited the site of the old Lake Fucinus near Ortuccio. Traveling at Night Volume 1, the annotated dream journals of Christopher Olopoli, sometimes called the only readable occultist. Literate, entertaining, bewildering. The wood lies outside the walls of the Mansis. As any student of the histories knows, the Mansis has no walls. Olopoli describes how he came to make repeated visits to a dream wood via what he calls silver dreams. Trying to think your way to the wood, he explains, is like thinking your way to being in love, but I did find a secret that helped. A novel method for invocation and contrition. Ingenious and rather beautiful techniques for entreating the names of the hours, developed by Rory Morrow, who styled himself the Sage Knight. The techniques rely on the unique qualities of the Arequipean tongue. Morrow professes himself surprised that they serve better to entreat the names of the vagabond than the names of lantern or winter hours. Morrow demonstrates that preliminal meter techniques can be used with sufficient rows to invoke the vagabond's names, transforming an enduring reflection into something wider of the sky. One of the things I feel like I should mention on here, I think, there's always this challenge when you're doing a broadcast, and specifically doing a broadcast of something that you're very familiar with, is this idea that, people have seen, like I'm a constant in terms of the broadcast. I know I don't necessarily remember, but I have a pretty good idea of the things that I've talked about already. And it would be probably that it would be pretty conceited of me to assume that people have seen every single thing that I've done. But, my baseline, both for my personal experience of the game, as well as what I think people who've kind of gone through 200 episodes will be, is that they're sort of familiar with the setting and how the game works. But this is also one of the ways that it can actually, this can be a very bad assumption, and one that is quite damaging to doing, maybe I'm not in a position to say what engaging content is, but it can be something that serves counter to uh, putting on a good show, or helping people get into the game in a way that they maybe haven't had before. And it's hard, right? Because usually what will happen online is, like, at the risk of being unkind, like, the internet's full of know-it-alls. So, there's always going to be a bunch of people who are like, we knew that already, or that was obvious, or, like, or if you get something wrong, right, people are just going to leap at the opportunity to correct you, often with inaccurate information. But the great it's really important to sort of push against those possibilities, those tendencies, because a little bit like people who are doing marketing and things like that, know all too well. You can be paying money and like have a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign behind something, and you are still trying to break through for an audience. So with that in mind, one of the things that I want, there's a massive scaffolding for what's actually going to be a very simple point, but one of the things that I really like about Book of Hours in particular, in relation to Cultist Simulator, where I sort of had this understanding of the game, right? I've spoken many times about how these games sort of reduce the world down into these individual cards, all of these objects. And I mean, there's something kind of nice, like if you consider occult traditions and, the influence of Neoplatonism on them, and like the idea of sort of forms and such. Like, there can be some fun ways that you can see this as a mapping to sort of just this general occult understanding of the world as reflected in like some of the inspirations for this game, or at the very least what it's talking about. I don't know how much like Plotinus, Weather Factory sat down and read to make this game. But again, one of the things that's really nice, whether it's Cultist Simulator or Book of Hours, and arguably Cultist Simulator, this is even more apparent because it's a big desktop and there's nothing else going on there. But you have these individual representations of the world as these little cards, and they reflect certain aspects, right? So you've these fundamental properties of the world. You've got these principles. So you've got the Grail, you've got the heart. It describes what these things are. You learn more about them as you go through the games. That's what usually a lot of these books are about. But one of the things that I find kind of fun is the way that the game treats the people who are in the world, right? These people, like, it's kind of funny, right? If you go into the game's files and you look at the JSON files, like, you can see exactly everything that exists inside of the game and the way that it's ordered and the relations that they have to each other. If you're familiar with database layouts, it's exactly like that. So you could put this all into something like SQLite, and I mean, you need to do the translation and all of that, but like you'd be able to do all the usual joins that you do if you're ever working with it. You've never worked with a database, that's fine. You don't need it to understand the game. So you, the player, and clearly the developer, has a complete understanding of everything that exists in this world in the sense of something you can interact with. But that's obviously not the way that the people in this world talk about, right? So you have these scholars, you have these people who are trying to understand the world and see what's going on. Ultimately, that's what a lot of these books are, right? You've kind of been given this glimpse in terms of what the world looks like, but it's only a glimpse, and you need to do a lot of hard work to make sense of it. And what's a nice little technique here, right, is when it says, so Morrow professes himself the techniques rely on the unique qualities of the Arecapaean tongue. Morrow professes himself surprised that they serve better to entreat the names of the vagabond than of the names of Lantern or Winter Hours. So, again, I think everybody, this is why I talk about the assumptions, right? I don't think this is a big, like, mind-blowing revelation or something like that, but I like the way that this is presented inside of the game, right? So why is Morrow surprised, right? Why should Arecapaean, align more with Lantern or Winter Hours? Why is it surprising that it is more aligned with the Vagabond? Well, sure, you can try and figure out what Ericapean is and like maybe decode the what the language is sort of a reference to. But the simplest thing that you can say here, right? Ericapean, a language of surpassing beauty and elusiveness, revealed through the ecstatic apprehensions of the Orphics, the Eleusinians, and the Sibyls of the Rhine. Ericapean, these mystics claimed, allows for the elaboration of hues, sensations, and states of mind too subtle for grosser tongues. And as you can see here, it has lantern and winter aspect. So, this may be the benefit of the player. This may be the librarian's understanding of it. Although I do kind of think in this case here, right, like these are like states of the world. This isn't a matter of opinion that for all librarians, surgeries and exsanguinations will be knock and heart, and Ericapean will always be lantern and winter. But yeah, so in the case of Rory Morrow, they're surprised that these techniques work better with the Vagabond. And then, of course, there's other things related, right? This eventually talks about turning enduring reflections into horizon sights, which would be Rose, which we would associate with the Vagabond. But what I particularly like here is that it's not, you would think, because you're talking about a scholar, someone who's able to write a 10 rows, 14 rows text on the nature of the world, but specifically a set of techniques, clearly knows what they're talking about. Usually these things, I also like that it says a novel method, because, I don't know, it sounds a bit like scientific literature. But specifically what's happened here is, rather than it be a bunch of people who are these great scholars, with tremendous knowledge, and they're bringing down, these are characters inside the setting who are capable of expressing surprise, right? That there's, I wasn't expecting that. Why is it that Ericapean is so good at working with the Vagabond, and so on. So again, like on its own, I always think the takeaway that I would take for this is that I recognize that there are a few people who really want to get into this game, and they want to get into the lore of the game. And there's this feeling, especially, and I totally understand, especially if you're in like a subreddit, or if you're in an environment where it's clear that there are a lot of people who've been doing a thing, for years, and it just feels like they are so much more advanced. It does give rise to these feelings that, I'm never going to get to that level, or at the very least, I need to catch up. And of course, this is why people, will want to go to things like wikis. But what I also find kind of nice is that if you want to encourage someone to take the journey themselves and try to piece together little bits and pieces, these actually serve very nice little on-ramps, right? So in the case of this book, you could just ask the question, if you wanted to try and reinforce understanding in terms of people seeing how all these ideas interact with the characters, you can say, when you're reading this book, why do you think Morrow is surprised? And the reason why this is a nice one is that there can be cases in the game where there will be a character describing, like, so for instance, Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic, Volume 1, you can assume why the presses were destroyed, why there was this effort to get rid of the first volume. And probably what that will look like for people will be, think something involving the Suppression Bureau, or some sort of authority coming in and, trying to stop Cosley from having his way. But once you get to the second volume, you may change your views on that. And I don't think the game ever comes out and says one way or the other what the specific catalyst for it was. But I would certainly be more inclined to think that it was Julian Cosley who was responsible for getting rid of all of the old copies. So, and that's probably not the first thing that people think of when they see that item. I would go so far as to say, I think little surprises like this are like it's the Secret Histories games are full of them. Most people assume one thing when talking about the Crime of the Sky, but as you go through, definitely there's enough. Actually, what's fun about that one is I don't think it ever like comes out and says it, but it definitely leaves a couple of breadcrumbs that says it's not the thing you're thinking, which is also kind of nice. Again, that's a really good example of sort of a creator who has that capacity for empathy for the player, to be able to like play with that in a fun way and mess with the assumptions and such. And if you've ever seen Alexis Kennedy responding on social media to certain things, especially when people are asking for like hard answers on like lore stuff, right? Is it X or Y? It can only be these two. He'll always give the one answer that, you know, says both, or doesn't come down on the answer. At least that's what I don't have a comprehensive knowledge of the interactions, but definitely I've seen that kind of, you know, those kinds of teases are pretty common in the interactions that I've seen. So again, it's entirely possible that I think most players who play to the end will see Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic Volume 1. I think it is very possible that someone will play to the end and not find Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic Volume 2. So what makes the you know, the surprise at Ericapean serving to entreat the Names of the Vagabond rather than the Lantern or Winter Hours? This one, you know that if someone has read this book, then they have Ericapean. So you have all the pieces that you need to be able to draw the connection. And then, you know, once you sort of make that point, either someone realizes it or you point it out and say, so why do you think he was surprised? And then you take a look at Ericapean and I'm like, oh, it's got the Lantern and Winter aspects. Yeah. So what does that say about the Vagabond? It's like, oh, well, Lantern, you know, from the text would seem that the Vagabond isn't a Lantern or Winter Hour. So that's why, you know, and the penny drops and you can say, it's like, now there's a whole bunch of other things that you've encountered in this game where there are similar connections. You've gained little additional insights that will now color your understanding of the, you know, of the world or what's going on. And again, like I said, it's to me, this is, I guess, where good creative writers sort of earn their paycheck. Rory Morrow, despite being a knowledgeable character who's telling you, both the player and the librarian, what the world is like, that character still has the capacity for being surprised, even though they're very knowledgeable. And it's, you know, usually in these cases, right, you'll think more of like the wise old man who knows it all and is just laying it down in the book for you. And so it's a nice little touch for me that makes the world a little bit more alive, in my view. Anyways, for those of you where this was obvious, I do apologize for the long digression, but I really feel this is one of the nice examples in terms of being able, regardless of where people are in terms of their deeper understanding of the setting, this particular one is a nice example it's a nice example that can equip people onto a sort of a journey that will maybe help them make some of the more complicated or hard to find insights. And again, to do so, that big one, this is almost kind of like quoting On Thinking for Oneself by Schopenhauer, but like to earn that knowledge, right? To do the work. It's not just that you went and saw an online resource and it told you what's what, but specifically that you kind of rearrange the thoughts in your head to understand like why these things link together, which to me is always, that's the big reward on this one. Anyway, I'm going on too much. So thank you very much for watching, and we will level up strings and songs and herbs and infusions in the next one. Until then, take care.